June the 24th, 1950. The largest church on earth could not hold the crowd, so the right moved outdoors into St. Peter's Square, hundreds of thousands of souls, some counts say 500,000, there to see a peasant girl who could not read declared a saint. Her mother stood in that square, the first mother in the church's history to stand at her own child's canonization. And far from Rome, an old man sat alone beside a radio. He was the reason the girl was dead. He had killed her 48 years before, and she, dying 11 years old, had asked God to put that man in paradise beside her. This is the story of Maria Goretti, and of the hardest command Christ ever gave. Maria Goretti was born on October the 16th, 1890, in Corinaldo, a hill town in the Italian March, to Luigi and Assunta Goretti, tenant farmers, devout and poor in a way most of us have never seen. When the land gave nothing, they moved in 1899 down to Ferriere di Conca in the Pontine marshes near Nettuno, flat, wet, malarial country that ate the men who worked it. To make survival's arithmetic work, they shared a building with another family of laborers, Giovanni Serenelli, a widower, and his son, Alessandro. Two families under one roof. Remember the roof. Within a year, the marshes collected their rent. In 1900, Luigi Goretti died of malaria, leaving Assunta 6 children and another man's fields to work. So the mother went to the land, and Maria, 9 years old, took the house, the cooking, the mending, the babies. She never sat in a school. She never learned to read. By every earthly measure, that child had nothing. But mark what she had. She begged the catechism from a neighbor and a priest, and learned it by heart. And only weeks before that July, her mother's testimony places it on the feast of Corpus Christi, 1902, Maria received her first Holy Communion. Understand this now. The strength you are about to see in this girl was not willpower. It was grace, the life of God, given in the sacraments she had only begun to receive. Thin soil, the world would say, and in that thin soil, God was growing a saint. Alessandro Serenelli was 20 years old. He worked the fields by day, and by night fed his mind on the cheap, corrosive print of the age. Twice already, by his own later testimony, he had cornered Maria. Twice she refused, and he threatened her life if she spoke. She carried that fear in silence and prayed. On the 5th of July, 1902, a hot afternoon, the family's threshing beans, Maria sat on the stair, mending one of Alessandro's shirts, minding her baby sister. He left the work and called her inside. She refused. He dragged her in. What happened next comes to us from the only living witness, Alessandro himself, under oath. He attempted to violate her, and this 11-year-old fought him, not for her life, for God's law, and for his soul. She cried out, "No, it is a sin. God does not want it." And she warned him by name that he was damning himself. In his fury, he seized an awl, a farm tool, and struck her 14 times. They carried her to the hospital at Nettuno, where the surgeons operated without anesthesia. It was not enough. The wounds were beyond saving, and everyone knew it, including Maria. She lived through the night and into the next afternoon. And when the priest at her bedside asked the question the church has trembled at since, "Do you forgive him?" she gave the answer that priest and her mother attested for the rest of their days. "Yes, for the love of Jesus, I forgive him, and I want him to be with me in paradise." She died on July the 6th, 1902. She was 11 years old. Now stop. Here is where the world, and sometimes, God forgive us, careless Catholics, gets this story wrong. The church did not raise Maria Goretti to the altars because dying is what God demands of the violated. Hear the church's own precision. The catechism names the crime attempted against her, rape, and places the sin, all of it, on the man who commits it. The victim bears no guilt, none, ever. St. Augustine said it 16 centuries ago of the women violated when Rome fell. Purity is a virtue of the soul, and no violence done by another's lust can take it from the unwilling. If you have survived that crime, you carry no stain before God. The stain belongs to the attacker alone. Maria is not a saint merely because she died. She is a saint because of how she loved God first, at any cost, and her killer to her last breath. Her virtue was heroic. Her death was his crime. Alessandro was tried. 20, still legally a minor in the Italy of 1902, he escaped a life sentence. 30 years. He went in unrepentant and stayed that way for years. Then a bishop visited the prison, and some time after, Alessandro wrote him a letter telling of a dream Maria came to him in a garden, gathering lilies. She held them out as he took them, each one burned in his hands like white flame. Some tellings count them, 14, one for every wound. The account is his own, set down in his own hand. From that cell forward the man was different, by every record, a changed man. In 1929, 27 years after they closed the door on him, they opened it. He walked out a marked man. And at Christmas of 1934, he did the one thing that frightened him more than prison. He went to Coronaldo, where Assunta had returned, and on Christmas Eve he knocked at the mother's door, went to his knees, and asked her to forgive him for the murder of her child. And Assunta, who had buried her husband and her daughter, gave the answer that measures every man who has ever prayed the Our Father. If Maria forgives you, and God forgives you, how can I not also forgive you? Then she took her daughter's murderer to midnight mass. They knelt side by side and received Holy Communion, and as the account tells it, Alessandro stood before the congregation and begged the town's pardon too. Sit with that, the mother and the murderer at one altar rail. Rome moved. In 1947, Pius XII beatified Maria, and on June the 24th, 1950, before that ocean of a crowd, the church declared Maria Goretti a saint, the Saint Agnes of the 20th century, they have called her. And Assunta stood witness. No mother had ever stood there before her. You will often hear that Alessandro stood in that crowd. I will give it to you honestly. The better record says no. A friar was to bring him quietly. The friar died, and the journey was set aside. He stayed home and listened by radio. He did not need the square. The saint was with him. And Pius XII, preaching that day, said the words that guard this story from misuse. Not all of us are expected to die a martyr's death, but we are all called to the pursuit of Christian virtue. Then he turned to the young people massed before him and asked, Are you resolved to resist firmly, with the help of divine grace, every attempt made against your chastity? He was not asking only them. Alessandro spent his last decades in a Capuchin monastery in the Marche, welcomed, in his own words, not as a servant, but as a brother, their gardener and porter, a quiet old man with a murder behind him and a saint ahead of him. In 1961, he wrote his testament and sealed it. It was opened at his death, May the 6th, 1970. In it he wrote, Little Maria was really my light, my protectress. With her help, I behaved well during the 27 years of prison. The girl he killed had become the light that led him home. So what is this story for you, a man in this century? 2 charges. Take them like orders. First, purity is strength, and the fight is upstream. In that same testament, Alessandro named where his ruin began. He had been shaped, he wrote, by print, mass media, and bad examples which are followed by the majority of young people without even thinking. Not in the farmhouse, in the eyes. Cheap print, then, the phone in your pocket now. Brother, you know what that means. The man who feeds his eyes filth is digging the pit his weakness will fall into. The man who starves that appetite is not repressed, he is armed. Purity is not the fear of desire, it is desire mastered and ordered to love, and you will not win it by willpower. Maria did not have willpower, she had grace. You will win it where she won it, on your knees in the confessional, at the communion rail, one day at a time. Second and harder, forgiveness with teeth, not the greeting card kind, not it's fine, it was not fine. Maria's forgiveness canceled nothing that justice required. Alessandro served his decades, and it was right that he did. Forgiveness is not the waiving of justice, and it is not pretending you were not wounded. It is this, to will, before God, the eternal good of the one who wounded you. Maria looked at her own murderer and begged heaven for him. That forgiveness had teeth. It followed him into a prison cell and did not let go until it had walked him to an altar rail beside her own mother. So here's the charge. There is a name you cannot say without your jaw going tight. You know the name. This week you will kneel, and you will say that name before God, and you will ask, through clenched teeth if you must, that God bring that soul to heaven. Not because the wound was small, because Christ's command is not optional, and because an 11-year-old with 14 wounds obeyed it first, about the man who gave them to her. If she could, you can, and if you cannot, go where she got the strength. It is still on the altar. Altar, arms, allegiance. Subscribe, and next Tuesday, Auschwitz, 1941. 10 men are condemned to starve in a bunker, and a prisoner no one chose steps forward to take one man's place, answering with 5 words that echo into eternity. I am a Catholic priest, the martyr of charity, St. Maximilian Kolbe. And if you want the weekly Sanctum Dispatch, one reflection, one discipline, one action for the coming week, the link is in the description. Our Lady of the Rosary, pray for us. St. Maria Goretti, pray for us. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Fight well, brothers.